Penguin Audio presents The Lunatic Cafe by Laurell K. Hamilton. Read by Kimberly Alexis. Chapter 1. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, a slow time of year for raising the dead. My last client of the night sat across from me. There had been no notation by his name, no note saying zombie raising or vampire slaying, nothing. Which probably meant whatever he wanted me to do was something I wouldn't or couldn't do. Pre-Christmas was a dead time of year, no pun intended. My boss, Bert, took any job that would have us. George Smits was a tall man, well over 6 feet. He was broad-shouldered and muscular. Not the muscles you get from lifting weights and running around indoor tracks. The muscles you get from hard, physical labor. I would have bet money that Mr. Smits was a construction worker, farmer, or something similar. He was shaped large and square, with grime embedded under his fingernails that soap would not touch. He sat in front of me, crushing his toboggan hat, kneading it in his big hands. The coffee that he'd accepted sat cooling on the edge of my desk. He hadn't taken so much as a sip. I was drinking my coffee out of the Christmas mug that Bert, my boss, had insisted everyone bring in. A personalized holiday mug to add a personal touch to the office. My mug had a reindeer in a bathrobe and slippers with Christmas lights laced in its antlers, toasting the merry season with champagne and saying, "Bingle gels." Bert didn't really like my mug, but he let it go, probably afraid of what else I might bring in. He'd been very pleased with my outfit for the evening. A high-collared blouse so perfectly red I'd had to wear makeup to keep from looking pale. The skirt and matching jacket were a deep forest green. I hadn't dressed for Bert. I had dressed for my date. The silver outline of an angel gleamed in my lapel. I looked very Christmassy. The Browning high-power 9mm didn't look Christmassy at all, but since it was hidden under the jacket, that didn't seem to matter. It might have bothered Mr. Smits, but he looked worried enough to not care, as long as I didn't shoot him personally. "Now, Mr. Smits, how may I help you today?" I asked. He was staring at his hands, and only his eyes rose to look at me. It was a little boy gesture, an uncertain gesture. It sat oddly on the big man's face. "I need help, and I don't know who else to go to." "Exactly what kind of help do you need, Mr. Smits?" "It's my wife." I waited for him to continue, but he stared at his hands. His hat was wadded into a tight ball. "You want your wife raised from the dead?" I asked. He looked up at that, eyes wide with alarm. "She's not dead. I know that." "Then what can I possibly do for you, Mr. Smits? I raise the dead and am a legal vampire executioner. What in that job description could help your wife?" "Mr. Vaughn said you knew all about lycanthropy." He said that as if it explained everything. It didn't. "My boss makes a lot of claims, Mr. Smits, but what does lycanthropy have to do with your wife?" This was the second time I'd asked about his wife. I seemed to be speaking English, but perhaps my questions were really Swahili and I just didn't realize it. Or maybe whatever had happened was too awful for words. That happened a lot in my business. He leaned forward, eyes intense on my face. I leaned forward too. I couldn't help myself. "Peggy? That's my wife. She's a lycanthrope." I blinked at him. "And?" "If it came out, she'd lose her job." I didn't argue with him. Legally, you couldn't discriminate against lycanthropes, but it happened a lot. "What sort of work is Peggy in?" "She's a butcher." A lycanthrope that was a butcher. It was too perfect. But I could see why she'd lose her job. Food preparation with a potentially fatal disease. I don't think so. I knew, and the health department knew, that lycanthropy can only be transferred by an attack in the animal form. Most people don't believe that. Can't say I blame them entirely. I don't want to be fuzzy either.
"She runs..." Sample complete. Ready to continue?